If you're just joining the webinar, we'll wait just a couple more minutes until to allow people to join. If you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar, your camera is turned off and your mic is muted. But you can still ask questions via the Q&A module, or you can use the chat, and those will be monitored. Okay, it's 3:01. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm putting some resources in the chat. We do have a code of conduct for Idaho Open Education Week, ISU Open Education Week, that is. If you'd like to refer to it, it's in the chat. So I just have a few opening words. So why are we doing ISU? Gosh, this is ISU Open Education Week. And why are we doing it? Well, some of us at the library got interested earlier this year in OER when we learned about some recent research. We saw that 42% of Florida college students in a survey over all of Florida higher education institutions actually said they were taking fewer courses because they could not afford their textbooks. In 2019, a meta-analysis came out that showed that courses that adopted OER saw a 29% average decrease in their withdrawal rates. Those two numbers together tell a story, I think, about the financial situation of students impacting their retention. But there's a lot more benefits to OER than just retention, and I think we're going to talk about some of those today. I have 3 announcements before we move on to our scheduled program, our regularly scheduled programming. These are things I'm really excited about. So you may or may not know, but ISU is now a publisher of ebooks. We have a platform called Pressbooks provided by the State Board of Education where we can publish free ebooks. So if you're interested in publishing either an OER or traditional copyrighted material, the library can help you with that. We also now, thanks to our collaborator at the ITRC, Daphne Seng, have an OER course in Moodle that you can self-enroll in to get training materials and updates about what's going on around campus regarding OER. And I've put that link in the chat to show you how you can do that. It's very easy to self-enroll. Finally, next week is Idaho Open Education Week. That's the statewide OER conference. So if you're interested in continuing this conversation, check them out. I've put the link in the chat, or you can just Google Idaho Open Education Week after the session is over. Registration is free, and it looks like it's going to be a fantastic program. Okay, so I'm really excited today to introduce Dr. Iris Buder to talk about adopting her OER economics textbook. So Iris, take it away.
Hi, and thank you for the introduction. So as Kristen talked about, I am Dr. Buder. I teach in the Department of Economics and Finance at ISU, and I will be discussing my adoption process of the OER textbook that I have for my course, Econ 1100, which is a general ed course on economic issues. So just 1 second while I share my screen. So hopefully we can all see that. So the reasons why I decided to adopt an OER was because, first of all, there was the initial push for OER books by the State Board of Education that came out 2 years ago, I believe. I'm not entirely sure when, but it was discussed among the college faculty. Another thing is, like, we had some emails in our College of Business go through about OER adoption and about the State Board of Education's recommendation. So it made me think about this. Another thing is the cost of our textbooks, and especially economic textbooks for students, has steadily increased throughout the years, as we know. And doing some research into that, I found some startling statistics that actually really helped solidify my idea as to why I wanted to push for an OER for one of my courses. Then I also noted there were substantial changes that have been made in terms of the availability as well as the content of OER textbooks. So a little about my course. It is a general ed course. So this is the course that I adopted this OER for. And it is a basic premise of economics. So it's like an introduction to what economics is rather than a specific course like principles of micro and principles of macro. So just general oversight of what economics is. Right? So beyond the state push that we know has been occurring, there was an article posted in the New York Times in 2019 and was an opinion piece, but it spoke out to me because it's literally titled, How Professors Help Rip Off Students. Hey, as a student myself, back in the day, it was costly to buy your textbooks every semester. So on top of tuition, then you also have to buy these textbooks that honestly, you may or may not use for a class. We know that as a student. And additionally to that, right, you are going to use them for a semester and then maybe get back a small portion of the amount that you spent on the book when you're selling the book again. And naturally, there's some books that I kept. I mean, I was an Econ undergrad study. Clearly, I did my PhD in economics. So I literally still have books from my undergrad that actually were well worth the cost of buying it. But not every single book is like that, especially when it comes to like a general ed course when students who aren't majoring in economics are taking this course. And I actually have a few of the outtakes by my students because I polled them about the use of the OER, about why or why not they would adopt a book. Right, so that's been my stance on it. And the more I thought about it, more I feel like we should transition over as much as we can. So this New York Times piece, again, it's an op-ed piece, but in there you can see that some of the research shows that having grown at many times the rate of inflation, the cost of a leading economics book can be over $250. Okay? And another quote I found from the article was very important was that the basic ethics suggests that we have a duty to look for cheaper options before we inflict $200 or $300 books or the additional $100 access codes for our students. So that's another thing that is on top of the cost of textbook nowadays is when you have this digital platform that we also have those additional costs that are coming in. Right, so this really stood out to me after I read that email, and actually this was circulated by our College of Business, this email, and this link to this article. Okay. So this article also states that the average student spends over $1,000 on textbooks each year. Some spend more at a state subsidized community college. The prices of textbooks can't compare to tuition. Right? So a large portion of a student's amount spent on college may come from textbooks. Okay? Additionally, thanks to Kristen and her research, she has shown me a few other studies based on OER textbooks. And this one was from in 2018 from the Florida Virtual Campus. Right? So here you can see the distribution of the reports that students have made regarding the impact of the cost of textbooks. Right? So we see that over 64% of students who reported on this said that they did not purchase the required textbooks because of the cost of the textbook, right? Then we saw that almost 43% took fewer courses because of it. Almost 41% did not register for a specific course. So all of these show us that we are losing potential students to courses solely based on the cost of textbooks. Right? We also know that it can lead to poor grades, dropping or withdrawing or failing a course as well. Right? And so these are all issues I believe that we need to tackle as a community in order to help our students out in terms of accessing course material. So with that in mind, another study, right, this was a large-scale study that was conducted on over 20,000 students, showed that OER use decreased the drop, fail, and withdrawal rate, improved course grades, and particularly benefited certain students like the at-risk students, Pell Grant recipients, part-time students, or underserved populations. Now, we at Idaho State also have a number of non-traditional students, so we haven't done the research on this, but assuming that they will also fall into categories that would be especially beneficial for them to have access to these lower cost and free textbooks in particular. Okay. One of the last things rounding out the New York Times op-ed, right, was that really helped, again, push me personally towards the use of an OER, was because we have seen tremendous changes when it comes to the quality alternatives to traditional textbooks. Right? In particular, the one I'm choosing to review is the Rice University-based nonprofit OpenStax. They have spent years developing high-quality, peer-reviewed textbooks that are either free or very cheap. Okay, so again, we have seen humongous amount of progress among the OER books that are out there. And that was another reason why I was able to adopt an OER book. Okay. So when it comes to open educational resources, right? A lot of professors, students, whoever may be concerned about the quality of the content, but studies have shown that in general, OER do meet the commercial textbook standards. Okay? So over multiple studies, we have seen, or educators have seen, consistently rated the quality of OER as comparable to commercial textbooks. Okay? We also know that many OER textbooks have quality safeguard. Okay? And this is because many of them go through a peer review process, have credentialed authors, and are potentially evaluated by faculty. And we also see that OER can be updated continuously, right? Unlike traditional textbooks, right? So in terms of quality concerns, studies have shown that in general, we do see that OER meets the commercial textbook standards for quality. I'm sorry, there we go. So how I got started in terms of, how to pick a book. What I did first initially was to just do a Google search, OER for economics courses, because I personally had no idea where to start. So I just typed into Google OER for economic issues course. And economic issues course is also a very broad terminology for a course, but it brought me to this site, libguides.humboldt.edu, and was specific towards economics. And there I could see the various options that were available for Econ. So there's Core Econ, Lumen Learning, Merlot, Oer Commons, OpenStax, and Open Textbook Library. Those were the 6 that were available to me pretty much right off the bat. So I went through all 6 of them, right? I looked at Core Econ, Lumen Learning, Merlot, right? And you can see here the definitions behind what they are. So Core Econ is open access introductory text for undergrads. You do have to register, but they say it's easy to do so. Text is available as PDFs or an app for the iPad. Right? We also had Lumen Learnings, again, specifically textbooks on economics. Merlot additionally said they have a curated collection of free and open online teaching, learning, as well as faculty development services. Then we had the OER Commons, which was a curated collection of textbooks and resources for economic studies, and Open Textbook Library, which is a collection of e-textbooks, again, including books on economic analysis, micro, and more. Then the one that I chose is OpenStax College. So there are 6 available pathways I could go down, but OpenStax College was my choice because, and just looking at what they outlined, they say they provide a collection of textbooks on principles of econ courses, such as principles of micro and macro, as well as just a general principles of economics course. So then before I decided, well, how did I actually choose OpenStax? I went through again all of them to see what the content was, what book I could adopt, and so forth. So to me, OER Commons simply had too many options, if there's such a thing, but there is such a thing, because I could see by just the search results, there are 33 different texts, or even just regarding like economics, that could potentially relate somehow to my course. And again, there were just too many options. And from a student perspective, I wouldn't also want to have to click on a different textbook for a different chapter either. It'd be nice to have one textbook. So this one, to me personally, I tried to look through, it's just too many options. On the other hand, Lumen Learning didn't provide enough options for me. So I felt a little bit like Goldilocks in that sense, right? So Lumen Learning just had one book available for me. And it was pretty easy for me to say, that's not going to work for me because it was not specific enough for my course. Right? So I explained a little bit about my course. It is a general introduction to economics. So we cover the basic premise of microeconomics, macroeconomics, and especially important is how that it relates to current events. So we cover the economics of the environment, the economics of education, healthcare economics. I mean, I do every week a different subsection that helps explain why economics is useful to learn about. And so from this book, it was pretty easy to see it was not going to be able to be sufficient for my course. The layout for merlot economics, it was very easy to decipher where things were going to be and how things were structured. So if within the economics discipline, they have a book on econometrics, economic development, and so forth. And I'm actually very curious myself. I teach econometrics to see what the the OER availability is for that course in particular. But for my Econ 1100 course, again, I would need a combination of various books if I were to go the Merlot route. So then OpenStax. Okay. This is the layout that was provided to me with OpenStax. So they had, again, had for Econ, these three main books right here: Principles of Economics, Principles of Macroeconomics, as well as Principles of Microeconomics. So of course, I focused on the Principle of Economics textbook, and it showed that it was a pretty good match. So it did not have every single chapter that I cover in there. So for example, I do not believe it had a specific chapter on the education system, but it's pretty easy for me to provide a supplemental material for those sections that weren't covered in the book. So that is how I went through, starting with Google search to finding the textbook that would best fit my class in terms of the content. But then I also wanted to see, what other resources are there available. And with that in mind, right, what I was, looking for is any type of like supplemental readings or supplemental materials that I would have at my disposal from this open educational resource. Okay? And of course, we're all concerned about, well, how does it change your pedagogy in terms of teaching? And I will say it was a very minimal changes that had to be made because, yes, there were changes in reading assignments. So chapter 1 no longer, corresponded to chapter 1 again. So of course you have to go through your syllabus and make sure that the material that you teach corresponds with the new book reading. Okay. I did have to make changes to assignments created, but I will show you that OpenStax did actually have instructor resources for me. So that was very nice. Right, and then finding supplemental readings for chapters not covered. Skip this slide, but right, I will say that in terms of the chapters not covered, they were very minimal in terms of the outside material I would need to post. And from there, I could have picked another OER book and said read chapter 4, but instead I just got a PDF and did some research to see how can I best explain this one chapter that may not be in the book. So again, pretty minimal changes in terms of the requirement among the teaching perspective. Okay. So OpenStax does have some student resources, not too many by any means, but no textbook really, I mean, to my knowledge, has too many student resources. But what I thought was really important was, they have this getting started guide. I teach a course that is a general ed class, so oftentimes I have freshmen taking this class. Not only, but a lot of freshmen take this class. So with that in mind, it's really nice to be able to show them, here's how you get started, right? How, here's your introduction to college and, teaching and learning and things like that, right? They also had this reading and note-taking guide that they could access, as well as the student time management, which I think we can all agree is very helpful for especially freshman students starting college. So I do direct them to these student resources, and I hope to take advantage of them. On the instructor resource side, right, they have a number of different instructor resources. They have the PowerPoint slides for the lectures. So for each chapter in the textbook, they have PowerPoint slides created. They also have a getting started guide as well as a transition guide, because they do update their textbook as well. And they also have supplemental test items. So they have a test bank there for instructors, which is, of course, especially useful in terms of getting multiple choice questions to align the textbook with your exam. So that's a pretty nice option. They also had a sample syllabi language, right? And here you can, and various other resources that actually have not gone through yet, because I don't work with Apple iBooks. I'm not technologically advanced by any means. And of course, the nice test bank that if you're like me, you hate to create questions. You love teaching, but you hate to create the questions. It's very nice to have the test bank there. So officially that sold me on this book, right? It had most of the chapters that I needed. It was pretty easy for me to get supplemental material when I needed. And most importantly, it had a test bank and homework assignments. And the homework assignments also came with homework answers that you could then easily create and post and help students out that way. Similar to that, they also had the solution guides to the homeworks that I just talked about, as well as guidelines for diversity and representation development. So pretty good in terms of the instructor resources that are available from OpenStax. So this semester was the first time that I actually asked my students what their feedback is about this book. And it was an anonymous survey. I would like to do this every semester, and I'm actually curious to see how it went from, so I just did this about 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to ask the same questions at the end of the semester. I want to glean, has their perspective changed from the OER textbook that they're utilizing? The first time I implemented and used this textbook was last semester, so this is only the second time I'm using it. So from the student's perspective, and of course, this is survey data, so take it with a grain of salt. I believe I had roughly 50% of the class who answered this. Okay? And among those students who answered it, at least 90% said that they had either read the chapters assigned or at least part of the chapter. So the majority of the students, or 90% of the students, right, read at least something from the book. Okay? 83 of the students said that the OER text is comparable to other textbooks they have seen. And of course, then vice versa, 17% of students say that the OER text is inferior to other texts. Again, majority say that it is comparable to other textbook that they have used. 59% of the students in my class say that they definitely recommend the use of this OER for future classes. 34% said maybe they would recommend it, and 3% said they would definitely not recommend it. Right? I don't know if, to no surprise to anybody, 100% are appreciative of a free textbook offering, right? That was no surprise, but everybody loved the fact that they did not have to buy a textbook for my course. Okay? Other questions that I asked, right, was how helpful is this book to my understanding of the course material? And 45% said it was somewhat helpful, and 41% said it was quite a bit helpful, while 10% said it was very helpful. Okay. Then asking if the textbook is easy or not so easy to follow along with. 14% said it was very easy. 48% said it was quite easy. 34% said it was somewhat easy. So all in all, I was pretty happy with those results, personally speaking. Okay. Then in terms of, the content of the textbook, again, 17% said it was easy to understand. 34% said it was quite easy. 41% said it was easy, and 3% said it was not at all easy to understand. And then I also asked for some feedback regarding the textbook. Okay. So in particular, what I asked my students are what aspects could be improved on with this textbook. Okay. And so I have rounded out the majority of the feedback here, right? A lot of times I heard that the font size and text size could be larger. Okay. Some students said that ebooks are slightly harder for me to digest, right? Other students said it could be easier to navigate, right? And which surprised me, which I had not seen, and I will look into this, is that a student wrote that unfortunately many of the links have expired in the chapters and also in the glossary. So that'd be interesting to go through to make sure that which links have expired to see what that is about. Also, in terms of improvement, okay, some students have said that it is sometimes lengthy or hard to understand unless you already have watched the lecture. And another student made, I think, a very good suggestion. Is there a feature where you could highlight or the text at the margin? Then that would greatly enhance my learning experience. And I think that is the one thing that I would personally miss, because I am a paper and pencil type of person. I like to read a book, have it in my hand, and be able to underline things. But I also think that if you could write notes, and maybe you have the capability now, and maybe Kristen would know more so than I would, but I think if you could highlight things or type in notes, that would be helpful for a lot of students. And that is all that I have to share regarding my experience with the OER for economics.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, you are welcome to post them in the chat. I have quite a lot of questions, actually. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for that presentation. Let me make sure I have the chat open so I don't miss anything. There you go. Well, actually, my first question is more of a comment, really, as they say, but your students who want the ability to annotate, highlight, etc., there are actually products that do that, and I believe free products that you can use in combination with the book.
Okay.
One of them is called Hypothesis, if I'm not mistaken, and it's used more and more. And I believe there's another one called Perusal with 2 L's, Perusal. And I could shoot you a note after the session too. But yeah, and if anyone else is interested or knows of something they want to type in the chat, please do. The question I had for you with this, obviously this took a lot of time and investment to do this for your course. My understanding is you didn't receive a grant. You just were doing a normal review of the course and you invested all this time. Is there support that you could have received either from the university or department, from another source, that would have made this process easier for you?
I think, that's a really good question. I honestly, I don't know, because I think once you just get started in it, it's a pretty streamlined process. So to me, it was all about, how do I choose a normal textbook for a course? It was that same type of process. So we don't get grants usually associated with that. So I just took it as part of our job was to find the best textbook for the course. And I just happened to look into the realm of the OER textbook. However, I do think doing a deeper dive, so I would love if the Econ department, say potentially this is a push for the entire Econ department, it'd be great for all of us to get on board and look at the pros and cons of each one of these. And that would require a lot more time, because there's no way personally right now that I could go through. I teach principles of micro, which eventually I would like to switch over to as well. but there's so many textbooks for principles of micro. And so there, it'd be nice to have a grant associated with it, have maybe student aides help us, especially like economic students who just recently had the course, if they could also invest some time. So with a grant project that they can tell us their feedback as well. So I think from an individual level, it was just like any other semester where I would teach a class. Thank goodness, in a way, it was my first experience was with economic issues, because I was limited to the availability of textbooks in that sense, because I could easily strike one off the list. But if it was a principles of micro class where there are a number of options, I would need a lot more time with that. And I do think developing a grant for that would be very helpful. Like a summer research grant on that would be, I think, the way to go. I think that would, yeah, definitely be helpful.
Awesome. I'm in total agreement with you. And I have a follow-up question for you about the expired links, because as some backstory, with Mark Macbeth, another one of our textbook heroes, he was interested in having a copy of his OpenStax textbook that he could edit. So what we're doing is migrating it over to our Pressbooks. So with open content, that's totally allowed, right? You can copy and paste whatever you want and change it. So we're just copying the whole book and putting it on our publishing platform to give him the keys to it, so to speak. But one thing we have noticed in that textbook too is that many of the links are expired. And that's usually noted in the errata of the OpenStax textbook, but they don't update it on a rolling basis, it seems. Would you be interested in, or would it seem like too much work if you were to be handed the keys, so to speak, to your own copy of the OpenStax text on our platform?
Yeah. So I thought about that. I think it'd be a little overwhelming at first, to be quite honest. But I do think that it would be really neat to be able to include or exclude certain sections, because it's not like with every single chapter I cover every single section. And it's very hard sometimes to say, don't read this or read this or things like that. So it would be nice in that sense to not only be able to reduce some things down or move some things around as well. So sometimes when I introduce a topic and we say supply and demand, and if the book talks about supply first, but I always talk about demand first, it'd be nice to make that little switch, just those little switches, so that it follows better with the posted lectures. I think that would be very important. So I think it'd be overwhelming at first, but I would love to have that access in order to kind of make it my own in a way.
Yeah, that experience of customizing a textbook, I think that would be so powerful. What advice would you pass along if you had a colleague who was intrigued but not sure where to start, or not sure whether they want to take on the whole project of it? What advice would you give to someone just starting out?
It's not as bad as it seems. Number one thing, I don't think so. In terms of selecting the textbook, I do not think it would take me any longer going through a list of hard copy books versus the OER books. That to me was absolutely the same. What was different was figuring out among those options, right, what is best from the student perspective. That took a little bit longer. And also the potential of finding the outside material. But again, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't bad at all. I think I got lucky in the sense that OpenStax had those instructor resources, which to me is always helpful. I personally just do not like writing multiple, and horrible at writing multiple choice questions. So I'd like to have that option there. And then also I know that that will correspond then better perhaps with the book readings than any question that I could do. So honestly, I would just say, it's not as bad as it seems. It definitely takes a little bit of time, but just anytime you instruct a new class, I took it as in basically I'm creating a new class because I'm updating my class. And I think every few years, it's normal to update your class. So might as well do a new book with it.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. Do you feel that the culture around OER is changing at ISU? Have you heard more conversations about it, as outside of me bothering you with our program?
No, I have. As I mentioned, one of the reasons why I got into looking into OER was not just because we had a faculty meeting within our econ department about the potential push from the state board, but also because literally we got an email string sent to the entire College of Business about the cost of textbooks. What can we do? How can we help our students? And I mean, I haven't talked to my colleagues about how if they have adopted them or not, but I know it's been an open discussion and that no one seems to think that they are inferior quality to the best of my understanding. And I saw that when I introduced the textbooks, like I went through them, I looked at the content, and honestly, I did not think that they were inferior to the traditional textbook whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's like we were saying, it's each individual textbook has to be evaluated on the merits, right? And a
Mhm.
commercial textbook can have downsides just like an OER textbook could have downsides. So I hear you there. Thank you for such a beautifully put together and informative presentation. And I'm just checking the comments and questions over here. One question for me is that, yes, I can put links to Hypothesis and the other tech helper products I mentioned on our LibGuide as well, so it can be more available. And other than that, I think we are good to go. Oh, here's a question from Jenny. When did Iris first adopt this OER? Was it spring 21?
It was actually fall 2020. So fall 2020 was my first time experiencing this textbook, and then spring 2021 is my second time.
Wow, I'm really glad it worked out for you. I think the
Mhm.
stats that you collected were pretty promising.
Yeah,
And
I'm really excited to see what it's going to be like at the end of the semester
oh yeah.
and see how it goes. But 100% approval rate, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Iris. We really
Yeah.
appreciate, we know your time is valuable and we really appreciate you
No, thank you for
participating.
having me. It's been
All
great.
right. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.